So welcome to this week's walk around Untermyer Gardens. Today we're going to focus on the rock and stream garden. Untermyer had planted this as a rather sophisticated, intricate garden in his day. It took us over a year to be able to uncover enough vegetation to actually be able to find it. Then over the past several years, we've been restoring the stream and planting the structural woodies, and finally this spring we're able to start putting some perennials in. So let's go take a look at what we've been doing. So here we are at the top of the rock and stream garden where the water originates. I kind of call this the blue pool informally, partly because we've used blue foliage and blue flowers throughout this area. And when I say blue flowers in horticulture, of course I mean purple. But I'm standing in between a triplet of Picea, OMORIKA, Bruns, which is a fairly whimsical plant, very tight and columnar, somewhat weeping habit, but a really irregular trunk shape. There's a lot of character in these plants. They almost seem to have a personality. Every once in a while, when I'm over here by myself, I actually think somebody snuck up on me when they're in the corner of my eye. Moving through the garden a little bit, we come up to another interesting conifer in the blues. This is Pinus PARVIFLORA, Bergman. It's a semi-dwarf, so it shouldn't get much more than 3 to 5 feet. Again, we planted multiples in here. Very interesting, tight foliage. The early spring growth gets a really interesting red tint to it as well, and now you can see these cones that will persist through the rest of the season. Stepping back, there's an iris that's just past its peak for us a little bit, but I really want to bring it up. It's an iris hybrid called Iris robusta. This one is called Gerald Darby. It's a purple flowering plant, but of interest, the early spring foliage emerges very purple, and you can just see some of that color remaining at the moment. So here we are next to this Iris ENSATA. It's a cultivar called Temple Bells. We're growing this for its deep dark flowers. The falls really don't have much color in it, just a little hint of yellow, and it really pops against this background of another Pinus parviflora, this one called Gimborn's Ideal, very similar to the Bergman we looked at earlier, but a bit more narrow and upright habit, otherwise very similar in characteristic. So in addition to the blue foliage for conifers we try to use for the garden, we've also snuck in some yellow. This is a Metasequoia, GLYPTOSTROBOIDES Ogon, sometimes known in the trade as gold rush. It's one of the fastest growing trees on the market. It's one of my favorite trees for this yellow foliage. It's one of 5 deciduous conifers. I'll leave it to you to figure out the other 4. And this was a donation from one of our original board members, Larry Feldman, in memory of his recently deceased mother, Suzanne. So as we descend the rock and stream garden, I'm sitting here in front of a Campanula. This is a Campanula persicifolia, Takion white. It's been leaning toward the sun a little bit, so if you look here closely, we've used some downed branches and stems just to hold the plant a bit upright. It's a technique called brushing up. It's often preferable to commercial metal stakes or even bamboo. It's a little bit more subtle use of staking in the garden. Here in front of the Campanula is a really neat Heuchera called Lime Marmalade. I think it's aptly named. It will take some sun and it will take some shade with that big yellow chartreuse color to it. Kind of a fun plant to use as a ground cover. Next to that is a young example of an Acanthus, MOLLIS, or bear's breeches. You can see these very elaborate, very fun flowers. Right now in the late spring, early summer. Again, these are juvenile plants. The leaf whorls, or this foliage, will grow to be about 2 to 3 feet in height and width, and we'll get multiple flower stalks as it gets a bit older. Then I'm next to this Clethra, or cinnamon bark. You can see it's starting to have some exfoliating bark, and I'll have that cinnamon color. And then here we're getting just the beginning of the flower scapes. These will get 3 to 5 inches long, be somewhat fragrant. Small tree, large shrub, good for a small scale garden. So continuing with some yellows as we've moved away from blue, I'm in front of a Thermopsis caroliniana. Some people call it Thermopsis VILLOSA. I'll let you decide. It's a Carolina lupine. This plant will get 3 to 5 feet with these really impressive yellow flower spikes, and it'll leave us with an interesting hairy seed pod aggregation once we lose the flower. Next to that is another native. It's a Diervilla, sometimes called a bush honeysuckle. No relation to the honeysuckle whatsoever. We're growing 2 different cultivars here. One is Kodiak Black, which emerges with very dark purple foliage, and we're growing another one called Kodiak Orange, which gives us a really great orange fall color. Stepping back on the yellow theme, you'll see a fine textured Spiraea Ogon, Spiraea thunbergii Ogon. It's a yellow Spiraea, a small shrub. If it's really happy, it'll get to 4 feet by 4 feet, but we have very few that have actually grown to that size. And then finally, along this back edge, another Spiraea, is we have a small, and I won't say whimsical hedge, of Nandina domestica, lemon lime. This is another new cultivar to me just within the past year or two. We've planted it once, it came through the winter, and it's forming sort of a small formal element in this otherwise very informal. So we've covered the upper portion of the rock and stream garden, which is really largely a perennial border, not so much a rock garden at all. We have woodies and conifers and perennials. We'll add bulbs and make it a bit more interesting over time. But it's a brand new planting, and as we've been looking through, things are looking a little bit parched. So I'm going to take a break and water the garden, and we'll come back next week and look at the rock side of the garden.